It's 4 p.m. EST, and we have a full conversation today, so let's not waste any time. Welcome to today's webinar on the state of tech employment, industry insights for tech leaders. Thank you for taking the time today to join us. I know our speakers are eager to kick off the conversation, so I'll keep the introduction short and sweet before handing the proverbial mic to Nick. My name is Lindsay Lewis, and I'm the brand and content strategy manager at IT staffing and recruiting firm Motion Recruitment, parent company of JobSpring and WorkBridge, and the founder of Tech in Motion events. These are difficult times, and I know that here at Motion, amid all the challenges, we have been continually inspired by stories of people helping one another. From the essential workers and healthcare professionals supporting our families and keeping us safe, as the majority of us shelter in place, to those in the tech community pivoting their businesses or products to provide data, analytics, or help to the current crisis, or mobilize the now remote workforce, or combat growing security concerns, we see you. We see all the heroes emerging from unexpected places. Witnessing all these efforts around us, we hope to contribute our unique recruiting expertise to provide some help in motion content for the tech industry. We may not be physically fighting on the front lines, but we are excited to be a resource for our communities through the insights and data we have to help answer the vital questions we hear every day. This webinar is a part of Help in Motion, a collection of virtual events, articles, and guides to help the tech community through these uncertain times. Last week, we kicked off with almost 1,000 registrations for our How to Navigate Today's Market as a Tech Professional, and we're looking forward to part one of our series today, providing answers for tech hiring leaders. For more information, you can visit motionrecruitment.com/help-in-motion. You might be aware that while Motion Recruitment is a newer arrival to the virtual event scene, our organization is more than familiar. We founded Tech in Motion, an in-person event series with a membership of more than 200,000. Tech in Motion has been providing a forum for tech enthusiasts to hear stories that inspire, to learn from peers and leaders, and to connect with others in the IT community for close to a decade. Currently, Tech in Motion shifted to virtual events, and as Motion Recruitment, we're enthusiastic about going live with our own virtual events in their footsteps. 3 quick housekeeping notes before we kick off. You may have seen that you joined this webinar in listen-only mode, but we welcome you to submit your questions and comments in the chat box on your GoToWebinar panel. We'll do our best to address them during the Q&A session. Today's webinar will be available on demand, and you will also receive a link via email to view the video once the live session has ended. Finally, I'd love to invite you to follow us on social and interact live as the conversation kicks off, either on LinkedIn or on Twitter as Motion Staffing. Now that that's out of the way, I'd like to introduce our host for the webinar, Nick Campo. Nick has always been the adventurous type, once traveling through 7 countries in just 30 days during his college days. In the time spent, Nick still keeps the spirit of adventure alive, but he focuses his time on providing talent solutions to enterprise organizations. With 11 years of experience in the staffing industry, Nick has contributed his expertise to the temp and contract arena to help many clients tackle business challenges. Based out of Boston, Massachusetts, and New England, unlike Tom Brady this football season, here is Nick to lead you through today's session.
Wow, you had to bring up Tom Brady. I guess that's how we're kicking things off. But thank you very much. Excited to be here. The picture brings back days pre-quarantine when barbershops were open and you could get a haircut. So harken back to the good old days. But no, seriously, I'm excited to be here. Pumped to be hosting today. I think we got a great panel. I think, just in terms of what's going on out there, it's just there's a lot of questions in what's going on in the market from a hiring perspective. So excited to kick things off here today. Let's meet our panel. I think we got a really solid one for you guys today. First gentleman is Ryan Britton. He's currently an executive director in our San Fran office. He's been with Motion for 15 years, so Ryan knows what he's talking about. He's seen a few things along his travels. He's worked in San Fran, DC, Boston, and Chicago. Quite the journeyman. And right now he's running an open source development team, specializing in that market. From New York, we have Devin Cords, who's running one of our offices out there. She's been with Motion for 8 years, and all in New York, I think, correct? And is running our design and product team. And then our third panelist is Maura Pagano. She's coming to us from TrialSpark, which is a biotech company. And I guess right now she's running talent acquisition for them, right? And prior to that was running and working in talent acquisition at Google and Redfin. So a ton of domain expertise. across the staffing sector, and then Maura helping us out from obviously the hiring side. So just a quick agenda for everybody today. The first thing I wanted to say was we hosted a webinar last week, right, on Thursday. Some of you who joined that might be joining today. We thank you. The content from that was focused on the candidate side, right? Today, the agenda is mostly around tech hiring and leadership. So while the presentation might feel the same, the content itself is going to be geared to tech leadership. So we hope that you'll hang through this and take out some tidbits from that side. Some high-level agenda points here, and then we'll get into some live Q&A. Thanks, Mandy. So we're going to get into the state of the tech industry, right? And when we were putting this together, I was thinking about how my day starts, right? I get up like most of you guys. I go downstairs, grab my cup of coffee, and I watch the news, right? And there's a lot of headlines out there, right? Some of them are okay, and a lot of them are not so good, right? Here's one that hit me: how COVID-19 is leading the U.S. Into a new type of recession, right? And what does this mean for our future? A negative one, right? A more positive one would be that telecom and tech and gaming industries are hiring despite what's going on. So a little confusing. Maybe some industries are doing really well. Maybe some industries are doing poorly, right? And then Microsoft reports a 46% drop in recruitment. Google freezes hiring, right? That's a negative. That's a negative, highlight there. So we came here today to really unearth what's going on out there in the market, and where we wanted to start was just with some data. We want to talk about what's actually happening out there. So if you look here, there's a bunch of numbers on the screen, right? But there's one thing that stood out to me, and that's that IT unemployment in March is up 26% from February, okay? That's from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. That is a massive jump. We're not gonna try and hide from that. That's a huge jump. That puts IT unemployment at 2.4%. I think if there is a silver lining, if you're in IT hiring or leadership, that number is still 45% lower than the national average, right? So it has stayed somewhat resilient, although still just a massive increase in unemployment. Mandy, and then so on this, there's large numbers on this screen again, right? We're seeing in March 19,000 jobs were lost. Again, just it's obviously an unfortunate number and kind of paints the reality of the market. But what we saw from what is going on out there with this pandemic and with COVID-19 is it actually did create some opportunity, which is interesting, I think, and somewhat reassuring for us that are in the tech sector. Is 8,500 jobs were actually created in March. So 45% of those jobs that were lost in March were reabsorbed back into the economy in the form of new jobs. So I thought that was obviously an interesting stat as well. Looking here, so this is a trend line of year-over-year growth within the temp staffing market, right? And this is put out by SIA. I don't know how many folks subscribe to that, but they run a ton of data. And this focuses specifically on the temp staffing market, right? And we look at that because it's a good indicator of what's going on in the economy, right? If people are hiring an influx of contract resources, typically there's perm hiring going on, there's agency fees, there's not agency fees, hiring is in demand, right? You can see this massive decline here in 2020, and that's what we're experiencing right now. In fact, it's projected that in 2020, the temp market will decrease by 9 to 14%. Not a great number, and we recognize that. And we're going to talk about what's going on in the market today, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what we see for the future, right? But this vertical kind of increase, I guess it's a V curve, I think SIA calls it, slingshot effect, different terms for it, but we're looking and we're anticipating a rebound in the IT hiring landscape in 2021 of 17%. So I think what we're going to talk about today is what we're seeing, but a lot of the trends that we're going to talk about are things that hiring leaders can implement today to be a part of that rebound, be a part of that slingshot. So I thought that graph was pretty interesting as well. So I've kind of gone on and on here a little bit. Let's get this panel involved, right? What does, for our first question here, what does the tech hiring climate look like across various industries right now? I want to kick it over. Who do I want to kick it over? To Ryan.
I can start off. I can state the obvious that every person, every company, every industry has been impacted. And to your point, there's definitely pockets of companies that are hiring. There's also a handful of companies that are taking advantage of the increased supply and trying to make strategic hires into their engineering teams. Last Thursday, I know the candidate-focused webinar that we did covered some of the specific industries that are doing well, like streaming services and delivery and logistics. But overall, you can kind of look to consumer demand, and even to a certain extent, some of the companies that were funded just before the pandemic outbreak for who's doing well and continuing to hire, because they're still fairly well capitalized.
Yeah, totally. And I would say that, even for well-funded companies or companies that are feeling quite relevant right now, like those in healthcare, TrialSpark in particular works in the space of clinical trials and making those trials more efficient and more cost-effective. Even we are looking at our operating costs or managing to our bottom line or thinking about where we can be more lean. So even a company that might be able to quote unquote capitalize on the moment that we're in is going to exist in an economy that's different than it was as the year started. So I think everyone is thinking about their costs, and that includes their hiring plan this year.
Yeah, I think we've seen a shift in consumer behavior, which has shifted how the tech hiring climate is. I mean, consumers are becoming a lot more open to sharing their personal data with companies, as that's going to help with, curing this pandemic, which means an influx of industry analysis and data analysis that's ultimately helping companies determine which tech skills and roles to focus on, which also in turn changes the way that companies are hiring. So with that being said, companies also have to get creative, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But when this comes to hiring in this uncertain market, we've seen an influx in contract to hire positions to offset some of the risk on both the candidate and client side of things. So that's ultimately impacted how the hiring climate looks.
Yeah, those are all really good points. I know going from which industries that are hiring right now, I wanted to touch a little bit on what are the tech skill sets and roles that we're seeing right now? What's most in demand that you folks are seeing?
Yeah, I mean, think of everything that has to be digitized right now: insurance platforms, healthcare records, formerly antiquated workflows that now need to be optimized to support a digital-first environment. I was talking to the VP of design at a Fortune 100 insurance company, and they have used legal pads for 20, 30 years, and now they needed to digitize that workflow. So he's leading up this digital transformation team, which early adoption was a little bit spotty, but now they're kind of forced into that. So they've had to scale up their team with product managers, designers, data engineers, data scientists. I was talking to the head of talent acquisition at a large media company, and they had to hire and create 8 different data scientist positions just due to the influx of data. So everyone is having increased data needs and increased hiring needs. And one piece of advice that I really have is, if you're able to hire in this industry, you're competing against the streaming media content creation that you would assume are the highest tech skills or highest tech companies in demand right now, but you're able to compete with them if you're not, the Netflix or anything like that, because of the value that you have and how your platform impacts the user. So I think identifying which tech skills and roles are impacted by the amount of data and the digitization of the workflow and everything happening right now.
Interesting.
Yeah, I would probably put a caveat out here in the Bay Area where companies are always hiring for software engineers, but beyond that, there's certainly been an uptick in demand for DevOps, site reliability, and security. the engineers that can help scale and secure the infrastructure, or basically support the unprecedented amount of web traffic that we've seen as people sit at home and stream movies or online.
Yeah, I'll just underscore both of them and say, like, we continue to look for site reliability engineers as well. And then internally, like, our data team is more valuable than ever. They're working just right alongside the C-suite as we figure out what our KPIs are, what really matters as we get focused as a company. So I think maybe folks who don't have a really strong data or BI team in place today are definitely going to be looking for that.
Yeah, and I'll just touch on that too. That's a good point, Maura. One thing that I'm seeing also is we work with a large grocery retailer, and obviously they're booming right now, given the demand for home delivery for groceries, right? So I think in terms of skill set and industry, there's a huge demand for talent that can help with revenue generating platforms, right? So if you're a hiring leader, you're competing against maybe the Netflix of the world or any of these streaming sites. I think it's important to convey the message to your candidates as well on how your platform, your service, your product, whatever it is, how does that impact the end user, right? That's ultimately how you're going to win. Getting talent in the door is explaining to them in a way that your product, your service is just as impactful as maybe the next person. So. Moving on to the next question, guys, is how is the current climate impacting talent tech pools? What are we seeing out there, Ryan?
I think there's an interesting dynamic going on right now. Yes, there has been a major influx of resumes and profiles, on the market, that found themselves on the market. But you also have to understand that a lot of companies, especially in what has been a lot of the first round of layoffs, the first place that they're going to look tends to be the underperformers or people that there is a cultural issue with. So while, yes, I would argue that there's a larger pool of candidates, I would say that pool is a little bit diluted. And so you kind of need to find a balance, especially with your team, of how many interviews you're going to take on in a week to make sure that they can still get, their jobs done.
Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, on the flip side of that, great engineers and candidates are getting laid off, not due to performance, but because their company went under. So my biggest tip is leverage your network. Referrals are our top channels of quality talent, as they always have been. We had an entire tech team that was referred to us by a CTO of a fintech startup, and they're all really talented candidates, but the company was unfortunately going under. So you need to leverage your network. Tell your network, your staffing partners, your friends, your family, make it known that you're expanding your tech team. Leverage your internal teams also, as they're going to know who's going to be the best fit, because before this entire pandemic happened, they were the ones working there on a day-to-day basis. They understand the culture, they understand the type of person, they understand the type of talent that you're looking for. So leverage them. We've had a bunch of companies that are actually over incentivizing their teams or highly incentivizing their teams and offering higher referral bonuses or some sort of bonus. And so internal teams, internal referrals from your internal teams are the best way. We're obviously an external talent partner is second best, but use your tech teams and use your internal teams to help you hire.
What are you seeing, Maura?
Yeah, I would just underline both the points that Ryan and Devin had made. Like, you really just don't know why someone's on the market right now. Is it that they're organically looking, or that they have been laid off? And is that because they were an underperformer or had some cultural issue with their last employer? So most of those who are watching the webcast today probably have some tech screen in place that these candidates are going to need to pass, and hopefully they do, but as you get further along in the interview process, you are going to want to evaluate like what their impact was at their last company. Were they accountable? Were they a team player? Anything else that beyond their tech chops that might have caused them to be part of a layoff of underperformers. And if, hopefully that's not the case and the signs are there that they are going to be a great addition to your team, I think that maybe proves to you what Devin's saying, is that there's a lot of people who are just caught up in a bad situation. And then separately, I would say, like, as you're getting in those talent pools, hiring managers should be thinking about people who can be successful or autonomous in a remote work environment. Like, we all hope that, those of us that go to an office every day get to do that again soon. But we don't know what the future of remote work looks like for a lot of us. And I think we all need to be growing our teams with people who can handle a virtual environment and be a great team player, even if they're not with their team.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a hiring leader from a biotech company, Fortune 500, in the other day, and has an open role and got 200 resumes for it, right? And I think that's obviously indicative of everything that we're saying here on what's going on in the market. The unfortunate reality is that there is a lot of talent on the market. Do leaders have time to go through those 200 resumes, right? And to your point, Maura, do you have a vetting process to figure out, what they were doing? Were they coding? Were they a part of this project, or was somebody else? So, we are seeing obviously a change in what those talent pools look like. So, interesting stuff. So going on to our next question is, how is the current crisis affecting salaries and compensation, right? Salaries and comp, that's a huge topic these days, and really always. So curious what you guys are thinking about that.
Yeah, offers need to change. If you had existing bands for equity, the dollar amount may not be worth as much, or that it's projected to be could be worth less, and your standard equity package may not be worth as much to candidates anymore who just need that base salary. Or healthcare packages, a lot of times people are weighing those heavily when it comes to the total package. So due to the uncertainty, the impact of equity and stock and RSUs is just not really weighed as heavily. But you also need to be flexible based on what you can handle in terms of an offer and what the candidate wants. Because if you don't have a high enough cash flow, or you need to scale back a little bit in terms of the base salary, and you're willing to offer higher equity, you need to be transparent about that and say, this is not because I don't think that you're worth this dollar amount. It's just this is the state of the company right now. And if the candidate's requirements are changing, perhaps weighing base salaries a little bit higher, and you're unable to offer those higher base salaries, just be open about it. Because if you're open about it, then I think the flexibility and the transparency and the total package will just make sense and will incentivize candidates a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think along with that, there's a certain amount that you need to evaluate, risk and reward. I'll say yes, you absolutely can probably onboard engineers right now at a discount. But then you need to ask yourself, 6 months down the line, 9 months down the line, if the market normalizes, are they going to start to look around again? And what's the cultural impact of that, the knowledge transfer loss, and all those other things with losing great engineers? And so to Devin's point, being able to explain and be transparent about not only why maybe an offer is coming in lower, but also having something in place, or a roadmap or a game plan to get them fairly compensated, right? I think most people will be reasonable and kind of realize the state of the market, and they'll appreciate the candor. That kind of brings up another point, which is managers right now need to be prepared to answer a lot of questions in the interview process, especially as it comes to profitability, and stability.
Yeah. And I would say, like, a related point to all of this is even thinking about retention for your existing, like, top tech talent. Something that I hear my colleagues in New York startups who are working in talent or HR think about is, okay, if we're not able to offer big salary increases this year, or increases in compensation related to promotions. What does that mean for our ability to retain top tech talent who might be wooed away by companies who are hiring, like the Slacks or Netflixes of the world? So that's just something that I think that tech leaders who are on the call today need to weigh as they're thinking about how do they retain their team. Does it make sense to hold the purse strings pretty tight, or does it make sense to invest in retaining the great employees you have now? Definitely trade-offs there.
Yeah, there are trade-offs, and it's got to be, if you're a tech leader, it's a tough job, right? I don't necessarily envy it in this market, because you're tasked with running a budget, running a company, maybe, running those salary negotiations, and you're trying to be mindful of the company's bottom line and everything, right? But at the same time, you need to capture that talent, and you want to get them in the door. You want to get them in the door, and then you want to retain them over a period of time when we get out of this, right? Because I think hiring leaders, they're smart, right? Candidates are smart. And when we come out of this, if comp normalizes or it changes and goes up kind of with the hiring demand, then we're going to see people bouncing all over the place to look for, more normalized salaries. Not to say that they're not right now, but I think to your point, Maura, and to Ryan and Devin, it's a difficult, kind of challenge these days to make sure that you're getting that talent in the door at a competitive salary, and one that's going to keep them, there for the long term, so they don't jump and get out of that seat in Q3 or Q4, hopefully when we're out of this thing. So good stuff.
Totally.
So how has the current market changed the hiring process? And I'll just say it's changed, right? I mean, there's no more on-site interviews. There's no more, we were talking about this, there's no more going out to drinks or dinner with your newly hired candidate, right? This thing has been flipped on its head. And
yep.
I give kudos to everybody that, has been able to change and kind of adapt. But what are we seeing? What are you guys seeing? I'm curious.
Yeah, I think, the people on this call know that oftentimes if there's a job posted, you needed that person on the team yesterday. So I'm still seeing like a willingness from hiring managers to hire someone totally virtually, having never met them in person. Yes, that does mean that you're not getting to do a celebratory dinner or drinks when this person has an offer in hand, or getting to meet them at a coffee shop, maybe to woo them into the interview process in the first place. But again, I think that's because hiring managers still want engineers or PMs to join their team. That being said, I think it's a bit of a harder sell for candidates, especially those who are passive and maybe, aren't in a situation where they're laid off, but are looking at what a new opportunity might mean for them. And if they don't have the chance to meet these people that they're going to be working with day in and day out in person before signing an offer letter, I've seen a little bit more reticence there. So I think like what the folks on this call can do is make sure that you're going the extra mile with engagement. Maybe it's doing like a prep call with a candidate before an interview or before an interview yourself instead of the recruiter, or doing like a debrief on how the interview went over Zoom with or go to webinar with the candidate after they have completed their quote unquote on-site. Just as much touch points as you can have as a hiring manager with the candidate in this process is going to go a long way, because you're just not going to get that in-person time with them anytime soon.
Yeah, makes sense.
I've actually seen some of the same things here in the Bay Area where, it seems like managers are more gung-ho about being able to onboard, and there is a little bit of candidate reticence. The one thing I am seeing with hiring managers, they're having to leverage references a lot more for context on what it's like to work with these people and what they're good at, as they won't have the opportunity to meet them in most cases. But I think it also comes down to, with the fact that all interviews are virtual now, it's like, how streamlined is your process? We always recommend that it shouldn't really be more than 3 steps, 4 at the most, and it shouldn't take longer than 2 weeks from first touch to having the interviews completed. But to Maura's point, I think it's going to be about the relationship building in the cracks of the process. Meaning, if you have somebody that you're really excited about, you should be texting them on a daily or near daily basis. You should invite them to stand-ups. You should invite them to any virtual happy hours that you have and make them feel involved, because you got to put yourself in their shoes a little bit. A lot of the reticence that they're experiencing is justified. I mean, they don't want to be looking for a job again in 6 months, and they don't want to, if we start working in our offices again, they want to make sure that they get along with and enjoy, the people that they work alongside.
Yeah, and then one thing that I'll just say, we in terms of trying to hire for culture, that's a very difficult thing to do because you're not in the space and seeing what's going on. I know Ryan, you guys see a lot of folks that are leaning on references and other types of quality checks to see how they're going to fit into that group, right? To lean on their network of people. And I think you brought up a really good point, was just streamlining that having a defined process. I don't know if streamlined is the right word, but I just think defining it for the candidate, right, is a good thing, but also defining it for your internal stakeholders, right? So that they know, you're doing Zoom call 1, you're doing Zoom call 2, you're doing Zoom call 3, right? And then, hey, we're all getting together on the back end to make a decision here, yay or nay, right? So I think when it's choppy and it's undefined, that can lead to loss of talent. It can also lead to maybe a poor candidate experience. But what we're seeing is when it is well defined on the process side and the internal process side, those are the hiring leaders that are winning, right? Those are the companies that are getting the talent in the door and in the door quickly that is available. So, Devin, I don't know if I stole any thunder there, but did you have anything to add?
You did. That was what I was going to say. But it's having an open line of communication internally, externally. I think just to wrap all 3 points up together, everyone needs to be aware of what you're looking for. If, as a hiring manager, you need to be overly communicating exactly the type of candidate that you need, so that the next interviewer is looking for that same exact thing. The third interviewer is looking for that same exact thing. Whereas if we were in the office, you could just pull people into the conference room, introduce them quickly, send them on their merry way, to get the feel of the culture. We can't do that anymore. Everyone internally needs to be prepared to fully interview and be overly transparent about what you're looking for. If you're overly communicating, I'm looking for X, Y, and Z, then there's nothing lost in translation from interviewer 1 to interviewer 2. Is there an open feedback loop? Are people ready to discuss what they liked, what they didn't like, and how everyone's handling this transition? So.
Yeah, the other thing that I've seen, and if somebody wants to jump in too, that's great. But the other thing that I've seen in terms of the hiring process is, where a lot of organizations were on-site only, right? Well, once you get hired, you're on-site only, right? And I think what this process has done is it's opened up the doors for organizations, and Maura, maybe you can speak on this too, but for them to think, okay, if I can onboard somebody remotely, if I can have them start working remotely, maybe I can have them work after this whole pandemic thing is over remotely as well, right? And I think that opens up the talent pool a little bit, especially for some niche roles.
Yep.
Are you seeing any of that?
Yeah, I think that's totally true. And it's, for folks on my team who are often hiring for, yes, a very niche profile, we feel like we find that perfect person who happens to be based, in the Southwest or somewhere, that's not like within commuting distance of New York City. And I think we're all kind of like, selfishly excited that this might mean that, now those people are on the table and we can, confidently present them to our hiring managers and say, hey, like it might make sense for us to bring this person on board, even if they're not local, which if there is any silver lining might be in this situation.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree. The hiring process is just totally changed. And I think we're all adapting to it for sure. But I think to your point, Maura, there's definitely a silver lining there for all of us. So good stuff, guys. So we're moving pretty quick here, but maybe we spend some time on this one, right? What final advice do you have for tech leaders, going into the rest of this year, and then, as we go into 2021? Or you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I would say something that we're doing at TrialSpark that I think external recruiting partners can do, hiring managers can do, internal recruiters can do, is invest in like strategic projects that you might not have had time for. I know that I personally feel like I've been on the phone for the last 2 years. Like I just only ever interviewing, only ever, getting candidates into process and out of process and sourcing and just trying to find the right people. And now finally have what maybe I wouldn't describe as a lull, but just less recs that my team is working on in general, which has really allowed us to think about things like our interview rubric, like our candidate experience, how we prep candidates, what the process looks like holistically, even things like onboarding are all kind of on the table for reevaluation right now. And if you find that you're not just like back-to-back interviewing candidates anymore and have a little time left to focus on those things, like that is certainly at least a first piece of advice that I'd offer.
Yeah, for sure.
Ryan,
yeah,
I think settling some of that process debt is great advice that any company and any manager, regardless of the discipline, can heed right now as, we have some more time and more freedom on our hands. My advice would be pretty simple. It's be informed, especially on, what's going on in your company. Demand some level of transparency or information sharing up the chain so that you can communicate that to the people that you're interviewing. Be available, right? These interview processes are taking it's not just 9 to 5 anymore. It's not just Monday through Friday. We're seeing managers having to be much more available. And then the last one would just be pretty straightforward. As a good rule of thumb is practice empathy, right? Realize that even during the interview process, that person you're talking to may have 2 kids screaming in the next room. They may be distracted during that coding question because, for whatever reason. So practice some empathy and be informed.
Yeah, I agree. It's very true. Devin, you got any words of wisdom for us?
Yeah, I think what I said before echoes true now more than ever. Is just, you all found out about this webinar through your network. You didn't just stumble into this Zoom call or this GoToWebinar call. You didn't just get here. You heard about it, whether it was through a marketing campaign or a friend of a friend, or you're, currently hiring yourself and just wanted to see what was going on. I mean, Nick, similar to what you do every morning, I come downstairs, I read the news, and then I go on LinkedIn. And the first thing is just always everyone trying to help out somebody else. Maybe they're, don't have any open positions right now, but they know of somebody through a friend or through a referral that is looking, or that's hiring, or that's on the market, or is really struggling. People are connected now more than ever, especially in the business world, in the tech world. My LinkedIn is just insane. So now is the time to utilize that network. Whether you're hiring now, or you're hiring 2 months from now, or hiring 6 years from now, you have no idea. If you solidify, like what Mara was talking about, if you solidify your process right now and can perfect it, then you are going to be miles above the competition. And using these references, using network, using your personal connections, now is the time to humanize the process as much as possible and just start reaching out to as many people as you can. Whether you've got the time where you know of somebody who does, this is the time where you can separate yourself from the rest of the competition.
Yeah, good stuff. And I agree with everybody. I agree with all 3 of you. The only thing I would add is if you're fortunate enough, you're in a position or you have the opportunity to snag talent, this is a good time to do that. I think that there's also talent that's looking to move maybe in industries, right? They're in an industry that is maybe not as resilient to something like this. Those folks, where they were once passive, might be more looking for new opportunities into an industry that they had not thought of before. They went from one and now they want to get into streaming or whatever it is. So I think, it's a good opportunity to go out and find that passive talent too. But yeah, I mean, I agree with everybody here. It's all about networking and keeping your relationships solid. I think I was telling you guys when we were doing a run through, I got a call from a client this week, and they just wanted to check in on what was going on in the market, right? Which happens from time to time, but just the, hey, Nick, what are you hearing? What's going on out there? Because I think we're all trying to figure this out together, right? So I just think more of those conversations, more of those dialogues. I know, I'm trying to keep in touch, not just with hiring leaders in my network, but also with my colleagues, whether it's at Motion or other staffing firms, to see what they're hearing. So just staying informed, keeping those relationships really tight. I think this is a great time. Great time.
Yeah, and on that, as somebody who was working in tech staffing during the last recession, it was interesting to see, the different hiring managers that were who maybe were not hiring at the time, the systems that they came up with to track some of the good engineers or people that they had been referred to, even if they weren't able to hire them. We will come out of this, obviously. And I also think the market was kind of due for a correction, especially here in the Bay Area. It was a very candidate-driven market who had some absurd expectations or even attitudes towards the interview process because they were so highly sought after. So there's probably a lot of managers listening to this call is like, this is the much overdue correction to get those egos in check for a lot of these engineers, which in a certain case is true. But how much are you, able to stay in touch even if you're not hiring, and how are you tracking some of those relationships more than just a LinkedIn connection to make sure that you're able to come out of this and your future self is going to be very thankful for what you do right now in the next 3 to 6 months.
For sure. That's great. Lot of good stuff there, guys. We're a little ahead schedule, and I think we have some time for some live Q&A, which we're excited to be a part of. So you guys can submit your questions, and then we'll take a stab at them. So I think I have a few here. Let me see. So I got one from Hugh. Hugh asked, with a larger pool of candidates, due to the impact of COVID, what are the best ways to hire in a timely manner? You guys touched on that a little bit.
I'll touch on that, and it can be just be very clear about what you're hiring for and what you're able to offer up front. I think in a more competitive market that we just came out of, sometimes companies would maybe withhold some information about the function of the role or the type of compensation they could offer, hoping to lure some people in to talk, and maybe they really like what they hear, and we can find a way to make things work and get creative and get them in the door. But I would say be very upfront. If you're capped at a certain salary band or certain total compensation range, that you're upfront with that, and so that the expectations are set from a very early stage, because I can tell you your team is going to be pretty frustrated if they spend a lot of time and energy interviewing candidates only to get to the offer stage and find out that we're not even in the same ballpark, right? And so all that time is wasted. So I would say be upfront and almost intentional with some of the information that you're sharing.
Yeah, I would also say that you can kind of use the remote interview model that we're all entering into now to your advantage. I think a lot of people here know that it can be a logistical challenge to schedule a full day of on-site interviews, figuring out, is the candidate going to have a doctor's appointment at their current role, with everyone being at home and it being a little easier to schedule an interview over video, or maybe the person, like we were discussing earlier, is no longer with their last employer. I think you can actually move through the process from a scheduling perspective faster than you ever could. So if your recruiting team is not taking advantage of that, make sure that they are, I guess, during this time.
A great point.
Yeah, and to touch on that as well, kind of looping both of those in together, if you are going to have a really fast process and a really fast turnaround, making sure to communicate that with the candidate as well, because especially if they're a little bit more passively looking, maybe they weren't aware that the process was going to be very quickly. And sometimes, candidates or clients can hire after one long extended interview, and the candidate who may be a little bit more passive gets a little freaked out or scared out about that stuff. So we just need to be overly transparent and make sure that we're communicating feedback loop, checking in with candidates, clients, or internal teams as well, and making everyone aware how many steps there's going to be. If a candidate wants, to talk to somebody else, making sure that that person's available and okay to interview. So.
Yep.
Be diligent about the information gathering. How many other interviews do they have? What is their timeline like to make a decision? These are questions that can and should be asked early on, so that that if the person's not going to be ready to make a decision for another month until they get their bonus or until they finish their project, whatever the case may be, that you can set up that interview process accordingly, so you don't lose a lot of momentum. If you get them through that process in a week and then they're sitting out there for 3 weeks, pursuing other opportunities or fielding other interviews, you're going to have recency bias kind of playing against you in those scenarios.
That's great. Yeah, for sure. I'm going to move on to another question here. We got one from Corey. Does the government have an advantage in seeking top talent now due to the perception of stability versus a for-profit company? And then they have, in quotes, volatility.
As somebody who worked at DC, I can touch on that. I'm sorry, Nick, were you going to go?
Well, we can both take a stab at it.
Okay.
I just real quick was going to say, maybe, but I just think the overarching theme in terms of stability, and I know Phil touched on this last week a little bit, is what is that person working on, right? If they're working on something that's cutting edge, or is the end user maybe it's a revenue generating platform, or the industry outside of government is one that is kind of essential right now. I think that plays a big part in it, not just the industry itself, but what is the product? Who's using it? Do they need to use it now? Will they need to use it in the future? Is it cutting edge, or is it legacy, right? So I think that actually plays a lot into the stability factor as well.
That's 100% true. There's a lot of technical debt within a lot of the government organizations. And I don't want to get too political on this, but I don't think I would use stable as the best description of our current, government. But the one thing that I will say is even hiring directly for the government is nearly impossible. More often than not, a lot of those roles are sub-vended out to the Lockheed Martins, the Raytheons, the General Dynamics, and even they'll go and sub those out to different businesses, right? So very rarely is like the Department of Treasury or the State Department going to be posting a software engineering job on their careers page, and then you can just apply to that and get hired. So I just think, sure, there's a lot of money. I would say probably being invested, especially on anything that has to do with healthcare or getting everything under control. But I wouldn't say that they have a significant advantage just because of some of the other issues that you're dealing with going into that type of large enterprise environment with a lot of technical debt. It's settled with a lot of technical debt.
Yeah. Laura?
Yeah, I would just if you think back to maybe the last 10 years, probably the first time any of us heard the word furlough was in relation to the US government and not the private sector. So I would say that's, my answer to that question would be not necessarily. And also our governments, especially here in New York State, are in a situation where the drop in tax revenue is insane. Think about the sales tax revenue that went in and out of New York City that no longer exists. And I know here they're talking about state employees who aren't essential potentially being furloughed. Now, that's on the state level, which might be different than federal, which I feel like is this person's question. But I think it's just as volatile in either sector, like government or private. But as an employer, if you happen to be a hiring manager who's working in the public sector or the private sector, it all does come down to what you guys are saying. What's the problem you're solving? Is this person going to join a team within the public sector that's helping the problem we have today, or is going to improve society long term? I think you can have an edge as a public sector employer if you're able to articulate that over the private sector employers.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we have another question here that I thought was good. John said, I'm worried about my own company's stability right now. As a senior tech leader, is right now a good time to be looking around? I think that's a really good question, especially at that kind of that leadership level. Did anybody have a particular opinion on that? Well, listen, I think the fact of the matter is that in any market, really, there's less leadership levels than there are leadership opportunities than maybe there are, engineers. You need one manager to manage multiple people, right? So whether it's a great hiring environment or not, there's typically less of those leadership roles around. So, but what I would say is if there's opportunity out there at an industry that's more resilient, why not look? That doesn't hurt, your current job. You have your current job, right? It sounds like. So there's no reason why you can't, put feelers out there to see what other opportunities there are, maybe in an industry that you feel or that you've learned is more resilient in this current economic, climate. It just might take you a little bit longer.
Yeah, and I mean, if that's what you're feeling, your instincts are probably right, and so why wait and be in a more difficult position? Operating and interviewing from a position of strength when you're employed, and when you can speak to some of the projects that you're leading or the team size that you're managing, you're just going to interview better than if you were unemployed and kind of scrambling to find any job to put food on the table, right? So I think even if it's a passive search, even if that means you engage with a recruiter and say, hey, I'm not going to be interested in seeing every job that comes across your plate, but if it does meet X, Y, and Z criteria, I certainly want to get pinged about it. You can set up that dynamic, depending on the market you're in. But as you mentioned, Nick, the higher you go up the chain, the less available roles there are. And I would just follow the advice that we kind of talked about earlier, which is follow some of the consumer demand. There's resources where you can even look up, recent funding for the area that you're in and try to follow the companies that may be capitalized well enough to make their way out of this.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think we had actually touched on this a little bit during our candidate-focused webinar, that your biggest attribute is your skill set. And if your skill set is relevant and you're learning right now, put yourself in a position to grow and continue to learn and move your career forward. And if you feel like things are a little bit unstable, it's now use your network, talk to people who are hiring, let's just put it out there, put some feelers out there. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to jump ship or leave right now. It's just good to at least understand, have your ear to the ground and hear what's going on.
Good point. Adam asks, what are the benefits of hiring a contractor during these times rather than a full-time employee? I'm working with a few clients right now, and they are actively hiring contractors. And there's a couple reasons. One, it's because whatever their product or whoever their end user is, there's a demand in that, right? So I think there is a benefit to bringing on a contractor right now to help with spikes in demand, right? Depending on what your industry is, you bring somebody in to help with that over the next 6 to 12 months, and then maybe that project winds down and that contractor finds another opportunity, right? We see that all the time. The other thing we're seeing a lot right now is contract to hire, working with a large healthcare organization that's looking for multiple DevOps engineers, and they're bringing everybody in contract to hire, right? They find it beneficial both for themselves as the employer to try that candidate out, and the candidates find it just as equally as beneficial. They get to try that employer out for a period of time to make sure that it's a good fit. So it seems to be a win-win right now. And we see, with some uncertainty, a lot of employers looking to bring contractors on. And there's a lot of candidates that enjoy that type of work, right? They like a 3 to 6 months to 12-month assignment and then going on to the next project.
Yeah, I mean, I think said simply, it offers you flexibility, right? And I think the cultural impact is less if you have a contractor leave or finish up a project versus hiring somebody full-time who decides to leave. But to your point, there are a lot of people out there, if you're a software engineer or if you're a DevOps engineer and you look to sort of build a reliable infrastructure, once you're done, many of those people don't want to sit around and babysit what they've built. They want to go on to the next project and something that they deem cool. So it's also just opening up. You don't need to do either or, but being open to either may open up your candidate pool for the type of person you're looking to, and somebody that fits within your budget.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say as well, is it mitigates some of the risk on both sides, because you don't have to onboard a full-time employee right off the bat, offer them, you know, benefits and all of that. You can get it through a third party, or they're an own independent contractor. And you're also probably going to open up the candidate pool as well, because candidates now are seeing that they don't know what their commute is going to be like. They don't know what the office culture is going to be like. They're a lot more accepting of contract positions versus full-time, because there is a level of uncertainty. So if you open it up to either or, depending on the candidate, not necessarily the position, I think that you'll open up the pool of people that you're going to get.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know about you guys. I'm digging the Q&A. A lot of good questions here. So let's just do one more before we wrap up. Robin asked, do you think it would be good or worth to hire more junior candidates considering the state of things? I don't know what your take is on the junior market, but anyone want to kick us off?
I think it depends on how your team is tiered right now. If you're top heavy and you've got a lot of senior or lead level engineers, you probably should have a more even disbursement of some junior and mid-level candidates. If you're already heavy with those types of people, I would go out and try to snag somebody who's more senior or lead level, which is more difficult to hire in a good market. I would say it kind of depends, and it's situational. The other thing that you have to realize is that training of junior candidates may be more difficult right now. I mean, paired programming certainly will be, more difficult. Getting meetings, getting training real time, even if that's through, going out to events or user groups or conferences, like those types of things just aren't possible right now. So you have to look at the resources you have to get people trained and up and running to your satisfaction. But I would say it depends on kind of how your team structure is already set up.
Yeah, I would say, like, if you have a really robust onboarding program and think that you can help a bunch of junior employees get adjusted, then great, go for it. If you think it would be more difficult for someone who hasn't rolled with a lot of punches in their careers or started a lot of jobs before, maybe this is their first time they're ever working at a company full time, if they are, like, say, fresh out of school, you want to be really careful about what their onboarding experience looks like. And then to Ryan's point, how you're training them and getting them ramped up.
Yeah, I'm sorry to jump back in, even though I already made a point, but I haven't seen this yet, but I would expect what we start to see is more internship programs, especially for recent college grads or people that are at 1 to 2 years of experience. I'd be willing to bet a lot of those people would be, willing to trade their time and energy for real world work experience, working on a product for free or cheap, right? So, kind of taking advantage of that. And it's also helping the kind of the market in general, as you're going to have more engineers on the market who have real world experience building applications or platforms that'll go live in production versus just, going through a boot camp or something like that. And so exploring that, you may not have to hire, you may be able to bring people in, as an intern, and where the only thing you have to offer is real world experience.
It's a great point. Great points, everybody. Good stuff. Thanks for sharing your opinions. Well, we're right up against the 5 o'clock hour here. So, first of all, I want to thank everybody that was a part of this today. Our panel, Maura, for joining us and taking time out of your busy day. And I want to kick it over to Lindsay. I think you're going to help us wrap up as well, actually.
Yes, I am. Just to kind of reiterate what Nick said, thank you so much for joining us. We got a lot of great questions, tried to choose a diverse kind of selection from that. But if you have any follow-up questions, we do have a post-event survey. Please definitely include them. We'd love to still answer them. And obviously, anyone that's on this panel is happy to continue the conversation as well. You can reach out to them on LinkedIn or through our website. So also keep an eye out for some Health in Motion resources coming out with more industry insights and data We'll be sharing that over the coming weeks. If you're interested, check out our tech salary guide, which is actually in the handout section of GoToMeeting. It has some additional tech job data. Also, please continue the conversation with us on Thursday. If today's session was interesting for you or you have further questions, there's a two-part series where this is the first part and the second part is going to be on Thursday, April 30th, with a focus on how to lead your tech team to success in a virtual world. So during part 2, mobilizing a remote workforce as a tech leader, you can actually probably get some of the answers that we saw arise in the questions that were submitted by the audience. You can hear from Tech in Motion's hand-selected panel of experts from across industries and technologies as they share best practices for fostering engagement and productivity in a remote environment, as well as the tools and technologies that are helping them along the way. Anyway, hope to see you there. Make sure to follow us on social and check out the Help in Motion homepage for all of our resources. We'll be following up with a link to the video from the session as well. And thanks again for joining us. Let us know if you have any suggestions for future event topics.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.